Hello everyone, I'm Alan. Today, we're going to draw George from Peppa Pig and tell you two stories about him. Let's listen and draw together. George's Great Expedition. George was a little piglet with a big heart and even bigger imagination. He loved nothing more than embarking on great adventures and discovering new things. His sister Peppa was always ready to join him on his escapades, but today George felt like he wanted to go solo. He packed his backpack with all the essentials, a map, some snacks, a flashlight, and, of course, his trusty toy dinosaur. He set out into the great unknown, his little legs carrying him farther and farther from home. The forest was dense and the foliage thick, but George pressed on, his little nose twitching with excitement. He hopped over rocks and roots, weaving in and out of the trees, and occasionally stopping to examine a particularly interesting plant or bug. As the day wore on, George grew tired, but also more determined. He wanted to make it to the top of the mountain he could see in the distance. He knew that if he could climb to the peak, he would be able to see for miles around, and maybe even spot some new places to explore. The climb was steep and treacherous, but George was nothing if not determined. He scrambled over boulders, slipped and slid through mud, and ducked under low-hanging branches. Finally, he reached the top, panting and sweating, but also beaming with pride. The view was spectacular. George could see for miles around, with the rolling hills and sparkling river stretching out before him. He could see the town where he lived, and the little house where he and Peppa slept. He felt like he was on top of the world, and he wanted to stay there forever. But as the sun began to set, George realized that he would have to start heading back down. He didn't want to get lost in the dark, or worse yet, encounter some of the forest's more dangerous inhabitants. He carefully retraced his steps, taking care to avoid slipping or falling. As he was making his way down the mountain, George suddenly heard a loud rustling in the bushes. He froze, his little heart racing with fear. What could it be? A bear? A wolf? A giant spider? Slowly, tentatively, George peeked into the bushes, and what he saw made him giggle with delight. It was just a little family of rabbits, hopping around and nibbling on some clover. George watched them for a few moments, and then continued on his way. Finally, he made it back to his house, where Peppa was waiting for him. She was worried sick, and relieved to see her little brother safe and sound. But when George told her about his great expedition, she was amazed and impressed. She knew that her little brother was one brave and adventurous piglet. From that day on, George continued to go on great expeditions, discovering new places and making new friends. He remained curious and fearless, always eager to see what the world had in store for him. And Peppa was always there to support him, even if she sometimes rolled her eyes at his wild ideas. Together, they were the perfect duo, a pair of siblings who would go to the ends of the earth for each other. George and the Great Race. George was feeling restless. He had spent the whole day playing with his toys and was itching to do something more exciting. That's when he remembered the big race that was coming up in the town square. The race was an annual event, where all the kids in town would compete to see who was the fastest runner. George had never participated before, but he was sure that he could win. He was a fast little piglet, and he had been practicing his running every day. He found Peppa and told her about his plan. She was hesitant at first, but George's enthusiasm was infectious, and she agreed to join him. On the day of the race, George and Peppa lined up with the other kids. There were lots of familiar faces: Danny Dog, Susie Sheep, and even Candy Cat. The race was going to be tough, but George was determined to come out on top. The starting whistle blew, and the kids took off. George ran as fast as he could, his little legs pumping furiously. He could feel the wind rushing past his ears, and the crowd cheering him on. But then, disaster struck. George tripped over a rock and tumbled to the ground. His knees scraped against the pavement, and he winced in pain. Peppa stopped running and ran back to help him. George was devastated. He had been so close to winning, and now it seemed like it was all over. But Peppa had an idea. She suggested that they finish the race together, holding hands. George was hesitant at first, but then he realized that Peppa was right. It didn't matter who won the race, as long as they did it together. He took her hand, and they began running again. The other kids cheered as they ran by, impressed by their teamwork. George and Peppa felt a surge of pride as they crossed the finish line together, arms raised in victory. The two stories can be linked together by the fact that both showcase George's determination and fearlessness, as well as his close relationship with his sister Peppa. In both stories, George is eager to embark on new adventures, even when faced with obstacles or challenges. And in both stories, Peppa is there to support and encourage him, even when things don't go according to plan. Together, they prove that anything is possible when you have a little bit of bravery and a whole lot of love. Okay, we're all done with the stories and the drawing of George from Peppa Pig. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. See ya next time.